Hey, what's up guys? Chad here with the Reptile Rangers. Now we're at the Kernersville Reptile Zoo and Medical Center again today, and we're going to talk about the difference between boas and pythons. Now I'm not going to cover every single difference. That would take a long time to do. But I'm just going to give an overview of the differences between the two. Okay? Now just before we get into that, right in that bottom corner, right down there is our subscriber button. Make sure you hit that. We appreciate you doing that and following along week after week after week. So let's get right into this. All right. So we're going to talk about the difference between a boa and a python. Now, I've got a Hypo Diablo BCI boa constrictor right here, and I've got a pastel Woma ball python right here. So what is the differences between a boa and a python? Well, let's talk about those. All right, so the difference between boas and pythons, there are some key differences, okay? One would be geographical locations. Now, pythons are indicative to certain geographical locations where boas are indicative to other geographical locations. That would be one key thing. Now, another key thing would be the boa is a live birther, technically. The python is a straight egg layer. Now, one is called oviviparous, which is the python, and the other one is ovoviviparous, which is the boa. Now, let me explain kind of what that means. Ovoviviparous means that boas still produce eggs internally, a type of egg, but the babies hatch out inside of mom and come out technically live birth. With pythons, they gestate their eggs for about 60 days, give or take, and some species go longer, some maybe a little less, but they gestate their eggs internally for a period of time. They lay their eggs, think of a chicken or a bird, and then for another period of time, the eggs have to be incubated. Generally speaking, most of your pythons do not incubate their eggs. Once their eggs are laid, they go. There are some pythons that absolutely will incubate their eggs and do what's called self-incubation. There are some species that do that. And then, of course, with the pythons, python eggs, the babies hatch X amount of days and months later down the road. Now, there are also some key differences that can bounce back and forth. Generally speaking, most of your pythons do have heat-sensing pits. Most of your boas do not have heat-sensing pits, as you see. But there are some boas, like some tree boas, that absolutely do have the heat-sensing pits as well. Now, boas and pythons have super small species like the Kenyan sand boa, the spotted python, the rosy boa. Those are some small species. And they can go all the way up to the largest snakes on the planet. The anaconda is a type of boa constrictor. And the reticulated python, the Burmese python, and the African rock python are three of the largest python species on the planet. Now, just for educational sake, the largest python is actually the reticulated python. It's not the largest snake in the world, but however, it is the longest snake in the world. The reticulated python is the longest. The anaconda is the heaviest body, meaning fattest. It's the biggest snake on the planet. Interestingly enough, anacondas are actually snake eaters too. They will eat other boas and other snakes within inside of the South American jungle. Now, generally speaking, a lot of your pythons can climb, okay? You do have climbing species of pythons and you have terrestrial. Climbing means arboreal. Ground dwellers means terrestrial. You have a good fair amount of your boas that do prefer to spend a lot of their time up in the trees, okay? Up high. They will go after things like birds and primates and small mammals that wander through and live in the treetops. Pythons will do the same thing. But a lot of your pythons that are ground dwellers, of course, are not going to go after as many birds. They'll go after more of the ground-dwelling mammals and other types of food sources that live on the ground for them. Pythons tend to be less active. Boas tend to be a little bit more active. And again, you do have species like your tree pythons and your tree boas that will never move, okay? They hardly ever move. They sit and wait in ambush, just curled around a tree limb for days and days and days. They don't always move as much. But you do have boas that are very active and do a lot of movement and a lot of travel. With inside of the boas and the pythons, there are a lot of species that are incredibly popular. BCI means boa constrictor imperator. It basically just means a mutt of different localities. In Central South America, there are multiple localities of boa constrictor. Things like Suriname, Guyana, Hog Island, Colombian, Nicaraguan, Peruvian, and the list goes on and on and on. Okay? With that, it just means that essentially from importation for the pet trade, sometimes they will cross over, but most of the time importation, when they've been imported into a country for the pet trade, then what happens is males and females just get put together and it creates a mixed blood of localities. Think of a Rottweiler and a German Shepherd. It's going to be a mutt, okay? BCI is essentially the mutt of the boa world. It is still a true boa constrictor, but it's just not a true BCC, boa constrictor. Constrictor would be classified as a true Colombian or a true Peruvian or a true locality, pure blood locality of boa constrictor. Now, you have great species within inside of the boa constrictor. The sand boas and the rosy boas are incredibly popular little boa constrictors. They're small snakes, can be a little stressy, not always the greatest of starter snakes. They really are not, but they do really well in captivity if cared for correctly. The regular BCI is the most common, and it has all kinds of morphs out in jungles and hypos and albinos and sunglows and moonglows, and again, the list goes on and on, okay, with all the different color morphs that happen within the BCI. With pythons, of course, everybody knows the ball python or the royal python. It gets its name royal because of the Egyptian queen Cleopatra was always depicted with one. And that's where it got the name royal python. But the ball python has 5,600 different colors and patterns from just everybody and their mother's neighbor wanting to breed these things. They are so overbred, so overpopulated, but there's tons of colors and options if you like the ball python. There's also the spotted python, which is a really cool small snake. You have other snakes like the carpet python, which has become very popular here of late. They can be a little testy as babies, but again, you have to think anything that's arboreal is generally speaking a little bit more grouchy when they come out because they tend to be predated on more than what your ground-dwelling species are. You have the carpet python, you have the Burmese python, which are awesome pythons. Reticulated pythons are awesome, not for the beginner. Irregardless of what idiots at expos will tell you that's just trying to make money off of you, retics are not a good starter python, period. With the pythons, there's a lot of good options inside the python species. There's a lot of great options within inside of the boa constrictor species. But the key differences between the boa, of course, one's live birther, one's egg layer. One, generally speaking, has heat pits throughout the whole species. One generally does not, being the boa. There are a few tweed-drilling boas that do have the heat-sensing pits, but by and large, they don't. And the other key difference is geographical location. As far as temperament, it can vary. It absolutely 100% can vary. There is no real difference other than the fact of ground dwellers tend to be easier to deal with right out of the gate. Your tweed dwellers tend to be a little bit more nippy right out of the gate. So this is python versus boa. What is the difference? Hopefully this has been helpful. Yes, there's tons of other things that make them different, but this is just a good overview and a general basics of what the difference between a boa and a python is. Hope this has been helpful. This is Chad. We are here at the Kernersville Reptile Zoo and Medical Center. We are the Reptile Rangers. Make sure to hit the subscribe button, the like button, the bell for notification. We appreciate you doing so and following along week after week after week. Our information will be in the description below for those needing to get in touch with us. Folks do it all the time. Medical issues, housing issues, feeding issues, looking for a pet. We do sell pets all the time. Matter of fact, the hypo that you've seen is up and ready for a new home. Make sure to check out the TikTok channel entitled Reptile Rangers. Also, the Kernersville Reptile Zoo has an Instagram page under the Kernersville Reptile Zoo. Make sure to check that out as well. Now, we appreciate you following along week after week after week. We'll either see you here at the zoo or we'll see you on the next episode. Later.